competitions her entire life, making historically accurate clothing since the age of 10. She holds a record for 7 national championships of the coveted Delaney Award with the North-South Skirmish Association in Winchester, Virginia. The criteria is stringent. Every item worn must be made by the weaver and researched, documented, and sewn with 19th century techniques. A proud mother, wife, and grandmother, she has also made award-winning costumes for her 2 granddaughters from birth until their young adult years, and now is entering her grandchildren in national competitions. Regular speaker and presenter, she has studied original garments in the following collections in museums: the Valentine Museum in Richmond, Virginia, the State Historical Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the State Historical Museum in Lansing, Michigan, the Historic Fort Wayne in Detroit, Michigan, the Fashion Museum Assembly Rooms in Bath, England, Victoria and Albert Museums in London, England, and various private collections. She holds a bachelor's degree in both interdisciplinary humanities, art, history, and a bachelor's in business management. Her presentation will demonstrate what a middle-class lady in the mid-19th century wore every day from the skin out.
Wow, all right.
Welcome, Maryanne.
I've never needed a microphone. Maybe her Sunday dress. Okay, what I brought today is I brought a silk dress with me. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started. We're going to get her dressed. So you've probably heard the term before, pantaloons. Okay? Pantaloons are a man's garment. Okay? Women wore drawers. And the reason why they called them drawers was because you drew them on each leg. And the reason why you drew them on each leg is because they weren't sewn together in the middle. Okay? There was a reason for this. When you see everything else that I'm going to put on her, you're going to say, how did she use the ladies' room or the restroom, or what they called the necessity? This kind of explains it, doesn't it? So we're going to get her started, and she is going to, first of all, have what was called her drawers on. These were, a lot of times, they were elaborate as far as the trimming at the bottom, and it was a way that a woman could practice her sewing techniques, as well as it just showed off a little bit and it gave a little bit more fullness. Now I did bring 2 pairs because a lot of times people don't believe me, but yes, that's exactly what they would have worn as the very bottom layer. So the next thing that she would have worn on was what was called a chemise. Think of this as the undermost garment. The word chemise actually goes back to ancient times, and the original word, or the original terminology, was actually a shroud. Well, we all know what a shroud was. It was the most undergarment that they would have wrapped a body in. So a chemise is actually, the word or the terminology would come from shroud or undermost. So that would go on top of that. So my mannequin is not as broad in the shoulders as me, so we're going to wing it a little bit. Ladies, I want you to think of this. This is your underwear and your bra. Those are the undermost garments. That's what they would have worn on underneath. And depending on your socioeconomic status, this might have also been what you slept in. Okay? So, you've all seen the scene in Gone with the Wind. And they put the corset on her, and she's strapping her in, and she's pulling her down. And then I think Mammy even says, you're never going to get down to a 17-inch waist again. Okay, I want you to think about something. So 17 inches is the average size of a roll of toilet paper. That was a fallacy. They did not have 17-inch waists. When you studied enough original garments, you see that there were women of all different sizes in the 19th century. Yes, there were some very, very small people, but there were some people that were not that small. And so you have to take that into consideration. Now, this garment fastens up the front with what is called a steel busk. These are metal hooks. I might have to loosen it in the back. And then it's going to be adjusted in the very back with lacing. And if you're really talented and you can do this, you can actually get into one of these by yourself.
No, you can't.
Yes, you can.
I've tried.
You need
Just a
talent.
little bit of
Talent.
assistance.
You just weren't really talented.
I didn't call it out.
I'm trapped. I can't get out of this thing.
Now, I got to tell you something. If I was dressing myself, I would not have put my corset on yet. Because once you get that corset on, you cannot bend over and tie your shoes. It doesn't happen. So I'm going to talk about shoes a little bit, but I did tighten her up a little bit. But yeah, once you've done this a couple of times, you loosen it up in the back, you do your metal busk in the front, and then you start at the back and you kind of work your way down and you tighten it up and you tighten it up, and you can tie this all by yourself, because you don't always have somebody around to help you. And I've gotten dressed in parking lots before, depending on the events that I was at, so. See how rigid this is? Okay, corsets weren't necessarily designed to make your waist that much smaller. When I have my good fitting corset on, it minimizes my waist about 4 inches, which doesn't sound like it doesn't really sound like a lot. If you squeeze a balloon, things go up and things go down. That's exactly what happens in a corset, is things mold to where they need to be. It creates the shelf and it creates the silhouette, which was popular at the time, okay? What was considered beautiful in the mid-19th century? Small hands, small feet, a round face, and very sloped shoulders. That was considered beautiful, okay? And so a smaller waist is going to make your shoulders look sloped, and a bigger skirt is going to make your waist look smaller. So it was all about illusion. So at this point, I would not have put my corset on. I would have put my stockings on. So I brought some stockings. These are plain cotton stockings. They would have worn silk, or they would have worn cotton. They typically would go up over your knee, and then to hold these up, because they don't have a lot of stretch, you would have worn a garter. Can I borrow your hand for a minute? Just stick your arm out. So these are knitted garters, and these are very fun because these are copied from an original pattern from 1861, and they're patriotic. These are wool, and what you would have done is put that around your leg and tied it off like that. And that would hold your stockings up. These were made by a friend. I don't knit, but she copied these from a pattern in Peterson's magazine, which was one of the most popular women's magazines at the time. So, now it's time to put my shoes on. These are reproductions, and they're copied from an original pair in a museum in Richmond, Virginia. I want you to tell me what looks unique about this.
They don't look like there's a left or a right.
There's not a right or a left. These are called straight lash shoes. And the reason why they made straight lash shoes is because you could wear them on either foot. And it was easier for the cobbler, or they call them cord winders. It was easier for the people who were making shoes to make a shoe that only needed one last, which was the wooden block that went in that they would form the shoe around, as opposed to 2 lasts, one for a right and a left foot. Not only that, shoes that are made on a straight last longer. Because say, for example, you favor one of your feet over the other. We all have one shoe that's worn down more than another. So today I'm going to wear them like this, tomorrow I'm going to wear them like this. So the shoes would wear evenly. So it wasn't until the Civil War and a lot of men's boots, a lot of original men's boots that are artifacts from the Civil War, they were almost all straight last, because when you're making that many for the masses, it's just easier to make no, right or left. It was shortly into the Civil War that they actually started doing right and left lasts. So after the Civil War, almost all shoes were made for right or left foot. But I always find that interesting, that that you see that. Now, these have laces up the, up the center front. Most straight laced shoes did fasten up the center front. When you start seeing antique boots and they've got lacing or they've got buttons on the side, invariably those are probably made for a right or left foot. Okay? All right, let's get her dressed. So, the next thing that we're going to, now that I got my shoes on and I can bend over, you would wear a petticoat, or some people call this a privacy slip. And what that does is, if you should happen to fall down or trip or expose yourself, remember those open leg drawers, you want to make sure that you're kind of covered down there. This one has some vertical as well as some horizontal tucks. This one's actually copied from an original from one of the museums in England. And yes, it took as much time as it looks like it did. Yeah. Okay. Prior to 1856, in order for a woman to get the silhouette of a bell-shaped skirt of that time period, they would wear sometimes up to 6 petticoats year-round, heavily starched. Some of them were even padded with what they called crinoline, which is actually horsehair. So, in 1856, a man in England invented something called the Thompson prize model skirt. And ironically enough, it became called the cage of freedom because it freed women up from having to wear 6 different petticoats. And the cage of freedom became the cage crinoline. This is copied from an original Thompson's model 1858. And it fastens up the front. Hold on, I gotta get her moved around here. And I've had people say, how do you sit down in that? Because that's the first thing anybody asks. It's actually very flexible. You just pull up the back and plop.
What's it made
Can you
of?
imagine how much freer this felt after wearing 6 petticoats year-round?
Someone just asked what was it made of?
This is made out of spring steel. And this is a cotton-covered spring steel. Sorry, I've got a knot in here. I'm trying to work my way through the knot here. There we go. Yes, it was cotton-covered spring steel. And it's actually quite light. It's actually a lot of fun to wear. You can get it moving. Okay, there we go. And then it was adjusted up the front as well.
Were they expensive?
They were mass produced to the point where almost all women could afford them. During the Civil War, when the North had blockades going into the South, and they didn't have access to items from England or from Philadelphia or from New York, there are diaries where women in the South were actually taking grapevines, and they were making hoops out of grapevines. They were sewing them into a petticoat, and like in the bottom of a petticoat, they used willow. They used very thin pieces of wood. Of course, that's not going to be as flexible as a piece of steel, but it solves the problem. It solved their need to be fashionable, and a lot of them were boycotting any other type of northern products at the time. I mean, when you're at war, you don't have access to them, but anything that was being smuggled over from England, they were also boycotting those as well. So it was all about being resourceful. Okay, now the problem with a cage crinoline is that you want to make sure that those rings of your hoop are not going to show through your dress. You don't want to look like you're wearing a bird cage. So, the next item that she would have put on would have been an over petticoat. And this would just help to smooth the rings of the hoop.
How long would it normally take for a woman to get dressed?
So I'm taking my time with this so I can explain it to you, but from start to finish, I can get dressed in about 10 minutes. Truly. I mean, even with the shoes. Oh, I heard that.
What did you say?
He said, how come you can't do that? So at this point, she's still in her underwear. Okay? She's not decent. She cannot go downstairs. She cannot walk around in front of anybody except her family or her maid or somebody in close proximity to the family. So again, this is still just underwear.
She's got 6 layers on right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How many knots are in the back?
How many knots are in the bag? Typically there are buttons in here, and I've got buttons. You mean on the
You keep adding.
I put ties in these because these are fitted to me, and she's smaller than me. So I put some ties to make it easier, because otherwise it would be too long. Because yeah, she is considerably smaller than I am. But you can still do the buttons, and a lot of times where the petticoat is, I button it in the front and then I scooch it around. So now she's going to actually put her dress on. So you were asking me earlier about this fabric. So I bought this is silk taffeta, and I bought this at Liberty of London in 1999. I bought the fabric, and it took me 5 years to get the guts up to cut it, because I just didn't know what I was going to do with it, because it was such a beautiful piece of fabric. Now, when you're making one of these dresses, do you see how the opening is not smack down the front?
Yeah.
So this is called a dogleg opening. And the reason for this is because you didn't ever want to have a seam down your center front. So there's a panel from here to here. So this is going to come over, and this is going to fasten here, okay? And then you're not going to have a seam down your center front. Oops. All right, let me get her hooked up, and then I want to talk about just a couple of the different elements and the things to keep in mind and to look for.
How long did it take you to make it?
This one took me longer than it usually does because I was nervous. I'm not going to lie.
Well,
And these are all hand sewn, these are done?
No, so the sewing machine was invented in 1834. By the Civil War, it was in pretty high, there were a lot of people that had them for home construction. However, there is always there's always elements of any dress that has to be done by hand. The skirt seams are done by machine, and you can only do a straight stitch, okay? There were 2 different types of stitches. There was a stitch like you have in a regular sewing machine with a bobbin and an upper thread. Then they also had, that's called a lock stitch. Then they also had a chain stitch machine. You might have seen these before. Wilcox and Gibbs was one of the most prominent makers of it. Who's got a dog? You know, you open that bag of dog food, and it's you pull that string. That's a chain stitch. The machine that they used to close those bags of birdseed, salt, and dog food, it's the same type machine that was invented in the 1830s. The mechanism has not changed. I have a Wilcox and Gibbs. It's a trundle. The machine's only about this big, but it makes a chain stitch. It doesn't have a bobbin. And it's really fascinating. This was not made with my Wilcox and Gibbs. This was made with just a regular straight stitch sewing machine. They did not have zigzag stitching. They did not have serging machines. So you can use a sewing machine, but it has to be just a standard straight stitch. So let's look at her silhouette, okay? Do you see look at where the arms start?
Right.
That whole look is to make your shoulders look sloped. What did I tell you about beauty? Sloped shoulders. So because that seam is down here, it gives that illusion. Smaller waist, big skirt. This would have been somebody who had a little bit of money. And there's a couple things you can see. See how the plaid is lined up? That takes some work. And it takes some finagling is the way you lay your fabric out. Fabric was very, very expensive. Labor was cheap, fabric was expensive. So to lay something out and to line it up like that meant that you were being very careful about the way you were doing it, but you also had a margin of error. In other words, you weren't just piecing anything. Same with the back. This is lined up down the center, okay? And again, that was a way that they would have showed their wealth. Now I want to point out something. Do you see these seams right here? Can you see the back seam? That is not 3 different pieces. That is still one piece that was cut out here, but you do false seams. Why do you think you do a false seam?
So you can change the size of it if you need to.
Yes, but look at how it makes the waist look smaller.
Okay.
It's all about illusion. It's all about that illusion. The other thing that gives this dress the illusion of, or the waist illusion of width is the width of the sleeves. This is called a pagoda sleeve. It was very, very popular in the 1850s and the 1860s. And because the sleeve is wide, it's making the waist look small again. But then underneath that, you would have worn a false undersleeve. And these were worn, and they were very common, because this could be taken off and it could be laundered. This just has a draw cord. It would have been up and underneath your arm, and then this just buttoned. So this would have gone up under here, and I'm just going to pin it in. That's going to make her hand look smaller. See, they weren't stupid. The skirt of this dress has a couple of different pleating options. This is just these are box pleats. This back area here, where it's really tightly, this is called gauging or cartridge pleating. And it's where you take 2 needles of thread and you do them together, like on 2 different lines, and then you draw that up, and then that's whip stitched to the bottom of the skirt, or the bottom of the bodice, and again, that makes your waist look small. The collar would have been something that they would be able to be removed and laundered, just like the other sleeves, because that's what's going to touch the inside of the skin. You can't stick this in the washing machine.
No.
Or the tub. And so the reason why you want to have anything that's actually touching the inside of your skin or touching your skin to be easy to be cleaned. Have you ever read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol? There's an excerpt in that book where it talks about Mrs. Cratchit in a thrice turned skirt. Now you're all going to go home and you're going to get that book out and look for that, aren't you? Let me tell you what a thrice turned skirt was. So this is what the bottom of the skirt looks like. Okay, it has a hem facing, which is just a cotton fabric, and then on the bottom of it is a wool braid. That's what's going to get dirty or worn or torn or whatever. That can be taken off. A thrice turned skirt means that when the bottom of a skirt gets so frayed that it's in bad shape, they would take it off from the top here, and they'd turn it around, and they'd cut off what was frayed. That's what a turned skirt meant. Now, does it mean it's going to be shorter? Yes. But if you are of the economic level that you have to make those type of changes, then that's what's going to happen. If you're still decent, it just means the skirt's getting shorter. Everything that they did had a reason and a purpose. Okay, I know it's in here someplace. There's also a pocket. There is a pocket in the skirt. That's just in the seam. And that could be hidden very easy. Any questions so far?
Is the collar needlepoint lace?
No, that is not. This is just it's a netted lace, but it's not a needlepoint lace. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about the use of whalebone? Baleen, when did they use it? How did they use it? Was it expensive?
So it actually was not expensive, and they use that in corsets. This corset has metal stays in it. But whalebone and baleen, which is actually not part of the whale's bone, did you know this?
Right.
Yeah, it's actually part of their mouth, it's part of their teeth, although they called it whalebone.
Right.
It was somewhat flexible. I'm trying to think of what we have in modern times that would even be similar to it for you to try and get the idea of it. But the nice thing about whalebone is it didn't rust. If this gets wet or if it gets damp, my stays, they can start to rust. But baleen or whalebone was very popular, and it was utilized for corsets as well as for boning, like in hats and other things. Part of the reason why a lot of the whale population in the 19th century almost became extinct. Right? And it wasn't expensive. It really truly wasn't.
Was it readily available?
It was, yeah. It was pretty much I don't want to call it a cottage industry, but the whaling, especially in the northeastern part of the United States, as well as off of England, was a fairly lucrative position to have a whaling ship. Because not only did they use the whalebone, they used the whale oil, they used the whale skin, they used just about everything from the whale. Yes, ma'am?
And that's what I was gonna say, to make the ink.
Yes, they used it for a lot of different things.
Yeah, and wasn't the fat used?
Yeah, whale oil.
for-
Yeah, they used it for
Lamps.
for lamps. Okay. So I showed you the pocket. So a lot of times ladies did have a pocket in their dress. It was an easy way for them to carry things. But they also utilized purses. This is called a miser's purse. Okay? Kind of self-explanatory. There was a reason for that. So this is a reproduction. It's copied from an original in a collection. And the way that you would access this is there's two little brass rings here. But if you push both brass rings down to one end and you reach in here, there's an opening, and you could put coins in the bottom of one, and then you slide that brass ring and the coins aren't going to fall out. Okay? Now, one end of this has a rounded end, and the other end has a squared end, and they both have beads. So this was back in a time before you had street lights, and you had a lot of good indoor lighting. So if I'm in a carriage, or if I have to pay the cab, or if I have to pay somebody, but I don't want to be digging around in my purse, they would put gold coins in one end and they would put silver coins in the other, and just by feel they would know, okay, all my gold coins are in the square end and my silver coins are in the other end. And these were a lot of times worn from a belt. And men carried these as well as women. A lot of the ladies' magazines at the time, they have patterns for these, and they were a very popular gift to give to your husband or your sweetheart. So they would be worked up, knitted or crocheted, wild colors, and that's what they would use to carry their money. But yeah, it's called a miser's purse because it's hard to get the money out. So our lady is going to go out, and so before she can go out, she does have to have some type of an outer garment on. This is a cape. And this is copied from an original as well. This is a taffeta. And it has the folds in the arms like that. So it kind of gives the illusion of sleeves. And it's enough to cover her discreetly as well as keep the dress clean. Remember, this is dirty streets, lots of dust. A lot of dirt, a lot of things flying around. She would wear a bonnet. Bonnets were considered formal headwear to leave the house in. Bonnets were required in church. Bonnets were required on the street. This is a spoon bonnet. Got my hair up. Let me see. Kind of get an idea. So do you see the shape? Kind of looks like a spoon. And lots of trim on the inside. That makes your face look wider, which was, again, something that was considered very fashionable. This is silk, and it's trimmed with some antique ribbon. It has some little jet beads at the bottom. Here, did
you make that?
I did, yeah. I forgot to put her pen on.
Where do you find the supplies for making hats? Because with some of our events that we have, I find myself tasked with coming up with costumes and trying to find even felt.
Good felt.
Yeah, to make a hat.
So that particular bonnet is, the frame is wire. It's a wire frame. It's covered over in buckram, or like I don't want to call it cheesecloth, but buckram is just a heavier weave cotton. The silk, I mean, I've got a whole list of my of suppliers that I get silk from. Unfortunately, a lot of stuff right now is really expensive. A couple of my sources are from England. There is a really good friend of mine, she's from North Carolina, she actually makes bonnets. And she has her own business, and this is what she does. And you can buy bonnet blanks, but you can also buy feathers, you can buy the ribbons, you can buy the flowers and things like that to trim them out. But you're right, felt is hard to find. And hat making is an art in itself. It truly is. So let's pretend that she has a head, and pretend she has her head, and pretend she has her bonnet on. So if she's going in her carriage, or if she's going for a walk, she's going to need her sunshade. Pale, light skin was very important. Not having freckles was very important. So she's going to need her parasol. This is a carriage parasol. You can see that it folds, so it makes it easier for her to transport. She could put that in her pocket. But if she's in the carriage, and for some reason the sun is over here and it's just really annoying, she can do this. And it will block the sun that way. Or maybe she sees somebody she doesn't want to talk to. That's a great way of just, like unfriending somebody. But that was a pretty common thing too. And this is an original. I've recovered it because the silk was split and it was not in the best of shape. But yeah, parasols were pretty essential for that reason. Well, she is dressed. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Did the width of the Freedom cage contribute to the possibility of fire danger?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a 120-inch hoop. I'm tall, so I typically wear a larger hoop. Somebody who is shorter is going to go to like 110 or 100-inch or a 90-inch hoop. These things are incredibly flammable. There was a case, I want to say it was in New York, it was a ball, and a woman caught fire. And by the time the fire was extinguished, there were 3 or 4 people that died. There are multiple different things that you can read up on. Ballet dancers. Think of how they illuminated ballet stages. It was all lanterns in the front. Ballet dancers at the time period were all dressed in netting. A lot of them died because they would catch fire, and there was nothing you could do. These things don't go out easy. You can't drop. What is it?
Stop,
Drop. You cannot stop, drop, and roll easily in this. Thank you. Yeah. So you had to be very, very careful about, how that happened. So, yeah.
So this is a Sunday dress, so during the week, the underneath would all be the same, just that it would be a cotton dress? then?
A cotton or a wool. In the state collection in Lansing, in their archives, probably about 80% of the dresses in those archives are wool. Now, I'm not talking about wool like my winter coat is made of. I'm talking about wool that is transparent. It's so light and airy. During the Civil War, we had blockades. We couldn't get cotton. The only way we could get cotton up here in Michigan is what was being brought over from England. And that was cotton that was either run from the blockade in the Carolinas to England. They're paying duty on that, and then they're shipping it back over. So cotton was very expensive for Michigan women during the Civil War. Wool was actually more practical, and it was more readily available. The other thing about wool, you know this too probably, when cotton catches fire, it spreads. When wool catches fire, a lot of times it will extinguish itself because regardless of how much you wash wool, you never get all of the lanolin out of it. And so a lot of work aprons that a woman would wear, full-size work aprons, they were made out of wool because little sparks would extinguish themselves. So wool was actually very, very popular, and like I said, there are many, many dresses in the state collection that are made out of wool. Very fine wool, beautiful fabrics. Yes?
What about the morning clothes?
So morning attire took on its whole different thing, okay? When Queen Victoria's husband died in 1861, mourning practices changed dramatically. She went into mourning for the remainder of her life until she died in 1901. She wore black for the remainder of her life. So there were different stages of mourning. For a widow or for somebody in the close family, typically it was 1 year and 1 day for full mourning, which meant everything was black. Even the collar was black, the undersleeves were black. The undergarments were still white because of practicality reasons for cleaning them, but all of the accessories would have been darker colored, would have been black. They also overlaid a lot of their mourning clothes in crepe. Crepe it's a certain type of silk that's very finely woven, but it has a dull finish because they didn't want anything that was shiny during mourning. You didn't want anything that reflected the light. As you get into the second stage of mourning, they might have started wearing a white collar, white cuffs. Maybe by the third stage of mourning, they would work into lavenders or mauve colors. Those were very popular in the latter stage of mourning. For children, ironically enough, mourning clothes, a lot of times little girls were dressed in white dresses with black sashes. There's a couple of pictures that I've seen that it was a funeral for a child, and the pallbearers were all little girls in white dresses with black sashes.
So you say second and third, so how long were these stages?
It depended on who you were mourning for. So if you were mourning for a husband, you could stay in mourning your entire life if you wanted to, like Queen Victoria did. Typically it was 1 year, 2 years, and then 3 years. By the third year, a lot of times they went into those mauves and those purples, those lavenders.
And so did that mean that they were, once again, on the market?
No.
Oh, okay.
They were on the market from day one.
Oh, okay.
And nothing was more appealing to a single man than a widow, because it usually meant that she inherited some money. And the young ladies that weren't married and didn't have large dowries never wanted to see a widow on the carpet in a social event, because she was a better prize. She was a much better prize.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
How, okay, you're saying this is like a middle-class woman.
Mm-hmm.
So she might have had some servants in the home,
Potentially.
you know, with a cook or somebody to help out. Approximately how many dresses would she have?
Not as many as you think. This was probably her best dress.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she might have had something that had a lower neckline. I did not bring an evening dress. Very few people ever attended a formal ball, what we would think of as a formal ball. If she was invited to a dinner or a party or something, if that's her best dress, that's what she would have worn. This might have also been her wedding dress. You know, wedding dresses weren't white necessarily. Only very high society women could afford a white dress because you're not going to wear it again. Or you're going to wear it in very limited very limited things. So maybe they got a new dress once a year, depending on what their socioeconomic status is. When you look at enough original dresses, you can see that they've been altered, styles. Something from the 1850s might have been altered to the 1860s. They utilized what they had. Like I said, fabric was very expensive, labor was cheap. So there's plenty of evidence of original garments that look like they've been altered 2 and 3 different times for that reason.
Now, of somebody that was of a lower economics
Probably
class
didn't
or
own a
whatever.
silk dress.
Pardon me?
Probably did not own a silk dress.
And then would they still go through all the, would they
Oh,
still
yeah.
be wearing all the
Mhm.
corsets and all this, all
Yes.
the hoops and all that stuff too?
Well, when you've worn this for 8 hours, you realize that that corset really does give you the support. When you've got 6 pounds of fabric hanging from your waist, the corset gives you support through your back and through your bust. So it's a lot more comfortable wearing this with a corset than not wearing this with the corset. Nursing mothers might not have had a full corset on, or they would have had something that was a little looser. A working class woman is still going to want that support. I mean, if you're bending over fires, if you're doing any type of physical labor, you're going to want that kind of support. Yes?
So I'm guessing not every woman, every household had servants all the time, and so they would be doing typical housework things around the house.
Yes.
I'm thinking ladies today would have, you know, your jeans on and you're getting things done. Is that what they would?
They probably, so a simplified version of this, maybe without the hoop, you know, a more practical length. If you're working around a fire or a stove, if you have to go outside and you have to get eggs, you know, you're going to have clothes that are going to be practical for that. So yeah, just like now, there were things that fit the chores that they needed to be doing. Yes, ma'am.
I can't tell from here, but you put that brooch on her neck.
Yes, so this is it's a reproduction. It has a Celtic I'll leave it up. You can take a look at it. I didn't bring my original jewelry, but this is a copy of an original which was called gutta percha. So what gutta percha is it's a tree sap, and they would pour this liquidized tree sap into molds, and they would create, and it was cheap jewelry. It was costume jewelry at the time. Bog oak was another jewelry that was really popular. Bog oak. It's fossilized oak, or it's fossilized wood, and they would carve it. And it was they were things that people would pick up on the grand tour. They were souvenirs. It was very popular in England. And if you went to England or Ireland, you would a lot of times pick up one of these souvenir pieces. That's why a lot of the things that are made from bog oak or from gutta percha have kind of a Celtic design, and this one does. It's got an Irish castle on it. Yes, ma'am.
Gutta percha is also in like the dental impression materials. So if you ever had a dental impression.
They also used gutta percha to make medical instruments, as well as other. It was their form of plastic. It was pre-plastic.
Golf balls as well, I think.
Yep. They probably did.
Yep.
Any other questions? Well, go ahead.
Just one question. You have cards up there so that we could hire you to...
I do not. But Barb knows how to get a hold of me.
Okay.
Oh, no, I don't sew for other people. No.
She works full-time.
I work full-time.
Okay, so
You need to retire.
I do. Yes, I do.
So one other question is, I was thinking about, because here, talking about like our opera house here, and so you had to go up these skinny little steps to get up to the opera house. And so I've always thought about that, is going up these steps and you've got this type of a skirt, of how in the world.
They made it work. So I went to an event at the, oh my gosh, it was just the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Have you ever been to Ford's Theater? So on the floor of Ford's Theater, it's tiered floors, but you're sitting in what I consider a banquet chair, and they're just chairs. And they're the same size the ones were in the 1860s. They're not that big. So people were crowded in there, and gentlemen just learn to adjust. The skirt comes first, and they just have to figure out where their legs and feet are going to go.
Now I have a question. You said you make things for your grandchildren. At what age did they start wearing the corset?
So my daughters are in their late 30s, and my oldest is 40. I started making clothes for them when they were infants. Little girls and children, actually infants were put in corsets, okay? Not like this, but it was like a belly band kind of a thing, because it was considered healthy to give them support through their abdomen, because you know what babies are like, they figured, okay, we're gonna make it easier for the baby to pick up. By the time the child started walking, they were put in what was called a soft stay, because they wanted them to stay in one place. And it was very similar to a corset itself, but it was more quilted and padded. My granddaughter is 12, and she will this year go into a corset with boning. But a lot of times it depended on how developed the child was,
Right.
you know, physically, and whether they had, you know, they had reached that age when they had started to have more of a female body.
Right.
Boys were put in dresses until they were breeched, which meant they were put into breeches or pants. Why would you do that?
Because it's easier to change a diaper in a
Yes,
dress.
because they didn't have rubber pants, they didn't have disposable diapers, they were in cloth diapers, and it's a lot easier to change a baby in a dress than it is to try and change a baby in trousers or in breeches. So they were put in dresses until they were breeched, and then once they were breeched, then they were potty trained.
Speaking of
Breeching?
babies.
Yeah.
When a woman was expecting a baby,
Right.
what did they,
How did
how did they do this?
So depending on how you carried your baby too, but first of all, they wouldn't have cut something like this up. A lot of times there was a skirt that might have had a drawstring, and then they wore what was called a sack, which was similar to that cape. It's just the top, it would be more like a maternity top. It would be open in the bottom, you know, open, you know, full. There's plenty of evidence on original dresses where you can see that these darts were let out. You know, if you carry low, everything is below here anyway.
Right.
But if you carry high, the darts were let out and then the darts were sewn back in. I also have seen some chemises. Remember the chemise, that undermost garment?
Yep.
That has slits right here,
Oh.
for obvious reasons.
Yep.
Okay, I thank you very much.
Thank you.